would love to talk a little bit about Lent. Because Lent's just started, we're only a few days into that season, and so I would like to offer a little bit of a reflection on Lent. But to do that, I'd like to share a really ridiculous story, and then we're going to be reading from a book that I've appreciated. Here's the story. It was I don't know who originally told it, but I first heard it from the author, David Foster Wallace. And David goes on to say that there were two guys sitting together in a bar in the remote wilderness of Alaska. One of the guys at the bar is religious, and the other is not. He's an atheist. And they're arguing about the existence of God with the special intensity that comes about after the third or fourth drink. And the atheist says, look, it's not like I don't have actual reasons for not believing in God. I've experimented with this whole prayer thing. It just doesn't really work for me. I mean, just last month, I got caught away from camp in that terrible blizzard and I couldn't see a thing. I was totally lost. It was 50 below, and so I did it. I prayed. I tried a prayer. I got down on my knees in the snow, and I cried out, God, if there is a God, I'm lost in this blizzard, and I'm going to die if you don't help me. And so in the bar, the religious guy looks at his friend, and he looks a little puzzled, and he said, well, then you must believe in God now because, I mean, you're sitting with me, you're alive, you were saved. And the other guy rolls his eyes and he says, no way, there's a bunch of indigenous people, they came and they picked me up, they were just happened to be wandering through and they're the ones that showed me back to camp. David Foster Wallace is an author I've really appreciated because he's able to look at a story in a slightly different way. And for this story, what we're encountering is that we have the same situation, but two perspectives. We have the same situation, but two motives. You know, often when we are looking at the same evidence, the same situation, the same activity, we can come assuming different things from other people. We can have different reasons for doing the same thing as another person. And so as we are a few days into the season of Lent, I'd like to do kind of what this story does and say, maybe there's another perspective that we can have. Maybe there's a perspective that is good for Lent, but maybe there's an alternate perspective that will help Lent become that much more meaningful and life-giving and energizing in our lives. But I have to be honest first, okay? This is where I have to admit it. I mean, I'm not really, I don't have a lot of experience with Lent. And so if you feel like what I'm about to say is incorrect, it's probably because it is. Because I didn't grow up with that liturgical devotion to Lent and other things on the Christian calendar. And maybe some of you today, that is your world. And for others of you like me, that wasn't. But in saying that, Lent has become this really beautiful idea in my mind. It's something that I have participated in on and off. And when I participate, I feel like it is this great opportunity to recenter my life. And so I'm learning to appreciate Lent, but with a twist. For those of you that don't know, like I didn't know, Lent is a commemoration of the 40 days that Jesus spent in the desert trying to avoid the temptations that the Satan was trying to tempt him with. If you're familiar with that story, Jesus is just baptized. He has this amazing mountaintop experience with God and then is sent into the desert to avoid temptation. And so in our Western world and in our Western thinking, Lent has become this symbol of removing one of the many vices that we enjoy through the year for 40 days. so that we can focus on health and purity, so we can focus on living a good life. It's almost, in my opinion, it's become a little bit like a detox season. You know? This stuff is great, I enjoy this stuff, but if I'm really honest with myself, it's not the best, so let's just get rid of one for 40 days. And that'll correct my life, that'll put me back in order, I've detoxed, and then let's put it back in. You know, for a lot of people that I chat with, that's kind of the perspective that we look at Lent through. It's not a rhythm, it's a detox. And so I don't think we would ever articulate this, but I always like, and if you've heard me speak before, you'll know that I appreciate doing this. I like taking logic further. I mean, if we follow that same train of thought that let's get away from one of the things we enjoy because it's not good for our life, you know, let's get rid of chocolate for 40 days, then I think the logic that we're using is to say all of these things are bad. They're not good. The things that we enjoy, the vices that we use, they are not good, which means that a lot of the world is not good either. We for Lent, often I feel like people say, for 40 days, let's separate a little bit from the badness that is in the world, in vices and enjoyment, and let's detox a little bit. Or at least that's how I hear it. I mean, I don't know if this is true, but I once heard someone tell me that that's why Roll Up the Rim was started. What better way to get people to continue to drink coffee during Lent than to offer them prizes? You know? There's so many other vices that you can choose. Just make sure you keep coffee because you might win a bike or whatever it is. I don't know. You'll have to fact check me on that, but I think it kind of fits, you know? All of these things are a little bad. Let's separate ourselves from that for 40 days, but man, I'm just not strong enough to separate myself from that other times of the year, and so let's go back to it. But I believe it was Amy Clayton. And if it's not, it sounds like something Amy would say. I believe Amy once said to us that our minds can be in the past, or in the present, or in the future, but our bodies ground us in the present. When we are present in our bodies, we can truly experience the living God. And so much like the silly story of the two men at the bar, I'd like to offer a counter perspective to Lent. But also like the silly story of the two men, I'm not going to discredit the activity, okay? Sometimes when we are deconstructing things, we say, let's throw everything out. And I'm actually here to say Lent is an amazing part of my routine and my rhythm and my spiritual practices, but maybe we need a slightly different perspective. Because like many activities that are in our lives, I think what makes an activity beneficial isn't always the activity, but it's the perspective in which we do the activity. You know, there's people who can be doing the same activity, the same movements, the same practices, but with a different perspective. That's what makes it truly life-giving and energizing. I mean, I'm a big fan of cooking, and I find it amazing that one person can cook a carrot for sustenance, and another person can use that same carrot and make it art. And enjoyable or sustainable or whatever perspective and lens they're choosing. It's the same practice. They're probably using the same pans, but it's more life-giving now. It's more beneficial. It's a part of something bigger than ourselves. We can have the same situation, but two perspectives. The same situation or the same actions or the same Lent, but two motives. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read from a book. We're going to chat a little bit, and hopefully you can see a different side of Lent. This chapter is called Light. John 1 says, "The Word gave life to everything that was created. And his life brought light to everyone. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it." The wondrously odd phenomenon of being a parent is witnessing the particular incarnation of each child. Same parents, but every kid comes out differently. And the peculiar paradox of parenting is forming the parts you know and the parts you don't know. You intentionally form in the child manners and responsibilities, social ethics, and good taste in music so they don't grow up to be a weirdo in society. But then there's this mysterious aspect of parenting, which is to pay attention to how they have uniquely come into the world and help foster their predisposition to its fullest fruition in greater society. Because people come into the world already made. Sure, we are a culmination of body parts, of eyes and ears and noses, enabling sights and sounds and smells and all other sensory experiences, but there is a deeper, unseen part of us too. We use words like soul and spirit to describe that untouchable part. It's the essence that's hard to put our finger on. But when you look deep into someone's eyes, you can kind of see it. This is the hidden part of the child you must pay attention to in parenting. And this is the same part in ourselves that we must meditate and reflect on. The Franciscan friar Richard Rohr sums up his spiritual practices like this. The physical world is a doorway to the spiritual world. And the spiritual world is much larger than this one. His tradition believes that there is a much larger reality, a reality hidden from our senses, a reality where God is easily seen and known, and this larger reality is only accessible through this physical one. There's no mountaintop you can take your friends to and say, "Look, here's God," while you point to a giant, floating, cross-legged, golden-bearded person who winks at you and says, "I knew you were coming." That's not the world we live in. There's no visible evidence of God that way here. But if you look through the scriptures, you'll find that physical evidence is not the evidence we are offered for faith to rely on. One of the best examples is when Jesus is teaching his disciples and references the final judgment, where apparently these two realities, the seen and the unseen, they become one. He says that some people gave him food when he was hungry, and drink when he was thirsty, and a few other interactions as well. The people say they never saw Jesus hungry or thirsty, and he replies, "When you gave food to the least of these, you were giving it to me." Kind of mysterious, right? But what Jesus is pointing to is that the action of loving and caring for others in need opens the portal to this larger reality, this heavenly way. A way in which we connect with God. It is through this physical world that we are invited to connect with the hidden reality of God. I know, we're starting to get really mystical here. We could start talking about heaven and earth and which one is our real home, and then I could throw in a Meister Eckhart quote at you. It says, if the soul could have known God without the world would have never been created. And then I'll lose some of you because that quote will cook your noodle as you ponder it for the rest of the day. So let's gather back and go here together. Who we are is deeper than where we find ourselves in this moment. And Jesus illuminates that deeper identity. John writes that the Word gave life to everything and everyone, and then this Word's life brought light to everyone. Another way to say it is that there is a giver of this life. And then the giver of this life joins that life, and his life brings light to all people. Don't get lost in all the metaphor. Put simply, the function of light is to help us see more clearly. Jesus' life helps us see our own lives more clearly. There are many ways this happens, but for one, his being human affirms our being human. It affirms that we are not supposed to be anywhere else but here. Now, in this life, in this world, from being born into it to disappearing from it, this is the life we are asked to live. You are supposed to be here. For another, he affirms that we, in some mysterious way, are an amalgamation of something seen and unseen. That we came from somewhere and we are going somewhere just like Christ did. And this world, this physical world, is the doorway to that somewhere. And God is not only present to us there, God is right alongside us here. If the soul could have known God without the world would have never been created. For me, Lent is a beautiful thing because life is a beautiful thing. And when we come to the season of Lent, we have a bunch of different options, but for me, often it comes down to two. We have two options for our perspective on Lent. The first one is to see all that is enjoyable in the world as bad, or as separating us from God, and when we decide to separate ourselves from the world and all that is separating us so that we can pursue the spiritual realm. It's what I focused on for a long time in my life. This world must be separating me from God, and so if I just distance myself, if I remove distractions, if I remove what I enjoy, then I must be able to connect with this spiritual realm. Or we can recognize that we experience God's presence when we are grounded in our bodies. That the way we experience this spiritual realm is actually through this physical experience. In our bodies. Not distant from our bodies, but in them. Not distant from the world that we live in, but in the world. The incarnational presence of God is a reminder that we aren't meant to be anywhere else but here. That in our bodies, in our messiness, in our humanness on this planet Earth, this is where we can find the doorway to God's spiritual presence. And so here's my simple reframing of Lent for this morning. And I'd like to be clear again that I'm not against Lent. I actually find that the act of giving up a physical enjoyment or an activity is a good thing. because it's a reminder of how truly special my body is. Last year for Lent, I decided that for that season I was going to give up sugar. That was a time for me. Not because my goal is to slowly rid myself of the world and all that's in it, but because removing sugar for 40 days helped me to feel closer to my body. I felt more mindful of my health and my rhythms. I felt more grounded in my activities. I noticed where sugar had become an unhealthy part of my life, of my routines, of my coping mechanisms. And so 40 days without sugar helped ground me in the reality that I am meant to be nowhere else but here. That I'm not here by mistake, that God wants me on this earth to feel the joy and the pain of my body and to understand that if the soul could have known God without the world, then the world would have never been created. I can experience God's presence when I am enjoying the gifts of this earth, and I can experience God's presence when I choose to abstain from them. Because Thomas Merton once said, "For it is God's love that warms me in the sun, and God's love that sends the cold rain. God is present with me when I am fed and full with bread and food and drink, and God is present with me when I am hungry and fasting. It is God's love that sends the cold winter when I get sick, and God's love that sends the summer when I labor and I sweat through my clothes." The only way that we're going to recognize, or the only way we're going to experience God's closeness, this spiritual realm, is to understand that God is intimately connected to our humanness, which makes Lent a blessing. 40 days of feeling grounded in your body, of reminding yourself that you are human. I can experience God's loving presence through the year with my community. I can experience God's loving presence as I'm eating and drinking with friends. I can experience God's loving presence when I'm sick at home and my wife brings me a bowl of warm soup. I can experience God's presence when I wish it was summer already and then immediately complain that it's too hot. We've never done that before. Our minds can be in the past or the present or the future, but it's our bodies that ground us in the present. When we are present in our bodies, we can truly experience the living God. And when all these bodily ways for me to experience God become second nature, when I start living my life as we all do, or we just take it for granted, and we stop recognizing that God is in the cold and in the heat, and God is in sickness and in health, when we stop recognizing all of this and it becomes second nature, do you know what God gives us? The season of Lent comes. When it starts to become second nature for us to understand that God is always connected to us in our bodies, when we enjoy life, then we have an opportunity for 40 days to remind ourselves that we are grounded in our bodies by removing something, by feeling more centered, by feeling more connected to our bodies and our beings, to our humanness. I can look forward to Lent because Lent is an opportunity and a reminder that how I treat my body, how I experience life in my body, and how I view my body is a doorway to God's spiritual realm. And so, my slight perspective change on why I love Lent so much Should I give up sugar for 40 days because the world is full of evil? Because this physical world is separating me from experiencing God's love and care and presence and compassion? I don't think so. I should give up sugar for 40 days to remind myself that my body, grounded on this planet we call Earth, is a doorway to experiencing God's presence in my life and in community every day of the year. That our bodies grounded on this physical earth is the doorway to the spiritual realm.